I'm Kenan Proffitt and welcome to another Blender tutorial. This one, as you can see, is going to be about creating this rowboat scene that is sort of lodged up against a sandy beach area. And I'm calling this a beginner tutorial, even though it's going to cover some pretty advanced things. I talk through it pretty slowly and hopefully explain things in a way that if you have some knowledge of Blender but you really want to advance your skills, you'll be able to watch this and learn a lot of really interesting things. I really hope some of you can stick through this to the end, and hopefully what you'll be able to learn from this is how to model a rowboat inside of Blender, how to use the node editor, how to use the ocean modifier, and then how to create your own realistic water material. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. So with a new scene open in Blender, make sure you're in the Cycles render engine because that's what we'll be using. And first thing we want to do is change our world settings so that they're actual real-life measurements. Now if you didn't know Blender can do this, it's very cool. Over here in the Scene tab, you've got Metric and Imperial. I'm going to use Imperial. I know a lot of people like Metric. I'm just a little bit more familiar with Imperial, so that's what I'm going to be using. I'm going to press 7 to go into top view mode, and 5 for orthographic mode. Now I'm going to press N to bring up this side toolbar. And now with our cube selected, you can see we have the dimensions of the cube over here in feet. And we want to make this roughly the size of our rowboat. So I'm going to press 7 again. I want my rowboat to be about 5 feet long, and we're going to say about 3 feet wide. And now I pressed 1 to go into front view, and we'll change it to about 1 foot tall. Now if I drag this blue arrow up, we want it resting right on the grid floor plane. So now we have the rough dimensions of our rowboat, and we want to start modifying this to get it to look like the model that we want. So I'll press 7 to go into top view, and we're currently in object mode, as you can see down here. We want to switch to edit mode. To do that, we can click on this menu and click edit mode, or we can simply press tab to go back and forth between the two. So we want to be in edit mode, and we want to press A to deselect all the vertices, and then Control R, and that'll create a loop cut in the very center of our mesh. So we want to click once we've done that, and click again to add these vertices in the middle of the mesh. Now if you rotate using the middle mouse wheel button, you can see it added vertices wherever there is a plane or a face, so all the way around, and that's very useful for us. So now I'll press 7 to go back into top view mode, and we just want to scale this along the y-axis, which is this green line right here. So to do that, I'll press S and then Y, and then scale up, and then click when you kind of have a rough idea of where you want it to go. This is essentially the middle of the rowboat. Now we're going to continue doing this to sort of shape out our rowboat. Control R and click, S, Y, and scale down. We'll do it again on this side. Control R, click, and then we'll select these vertices over here. First we want to press A to deselect these, and we can press Z to go into transparent mode. And then an easy way to select a lot of vertices at once is to press B and just draw a box, and that selects those. And we'll press S and Y and scale down, and we're creating the front of our boat, as you can see here. So maybe we can pull this in a little. And now we want to add some to our boat, so we'll press E to extrude, That's telling Blender to extrude those front vertices, and we'll drag it out. Now we want these scaled down, so S and Y. Scale down again along the y-axis. Sort of push that in. Now I'm zooming, and I'm panning by pressing Shift and the middle mouse wheel. We'll do the same thing again. Extrude, drag it out, S, Y, till we sort of have a nose of our boat. And that looks pretty good. Now we also want to sort of scale in the back of the boat. So we'll press B to create a box. Select those vertices, S and Y. And that's pretty good. So now you see we have the basic form of our boat taking shape. I do want to go back to the top view mode and sort of drag out the front of this boat as it looks sort of bunched up. So to do that, we'll press Z for transparency mode. I'll press B to box, select all of these, and just drag them out. Do the same to this front part, just drag it out. And it's all about just kind of fiddling with it. I'll scale these out maybe along the y-axis a little more. You can also select these, drag them back, S, Y. Again, it's all kind of how you see what you think the boat needs to look like. So that's a pretty good shape to start with. So now I'll press 7 to go back into top view mode. Tab for edit mode. And now down here you have the different selection modes while you're in edit. There's vertice, which each of these individual points are vertices. There's lines, like you see here, and then faces. So we want to be in face select mode and just select these top faces. I'm selecting all of them by pressing Shift and then clicking. And we just want to delete them, so we'll press X and then delete faces. So now you can see kind of where we're going with more of our shape to our boat. Now another thing we want to do is press your side view. For me it's 2, it might be different on your computer. To see what it is, you can go down here to view, by the way, and it tells you what your side view is. I've adjusted these kind of how I like them, but you can do the same. So I'm going to be in side view, and I want to taper in the edges of this boat so that it has sort of more of a rounded shape. So to do that, I'll go to edit mode, go back to the vertices, press Z for transparency, and I'll just create a box around all these bottom vertices. And I'll press S and then Y and scale them in just like that. So now you can see it's sort of tapered in, more of how a boat should be. Now another thing we want to do is the front of the boat needs to have some height. We want it to sort of go up in the front. So to do that, we'll select these vertices. I'm going to scale these in just a little bit, so I'll press S and then Y. And now I'm going to extrude these out to create sort of a board at the front of the boat. And then I'm going to go back to face select mode and select this top face. I'm going to press 1 for front view. And then now I'm going to turn on proportional editing down here. Click on enable and make sure it's set to smooth. And now if I just drag up with this blue arrow, you can see it sort of smoothly drags up this boat. And it drags up more depending on how big this circle is and you can adjust the size of the circle with the middle mouse wheel. I want it to be straight, so I'm going to press Z, and that'll just lock it on the up and down axis, and find somewhere that I like. I don't want it to go up too much, but just a slight angle, as most boats generally do in the front. So that's pretty good, so I'm just going to click. I'm going to press A for deselect everything. I'm going to go back into transparency mode by pressing Z, and we'll go back to the vertices. Now I want all of these to be level down at the bottom, so an easy way to fix that is to press B to box, select all of these, press S. Oh, we got to turn off proportional editing for this, so click disable. Now press S, Z, then 0. You can see that just flattens them all out at 0. We can drag that down so it's fitting back on the plane. Now we'll press Z to go out of transparency mode, and you can see the shape of our boat is nicely taking shape now, taking form. Another thing we want to do is with this sort of board that we created at the front of the boat, I'm going to select this top face, press 1 for front view. We just want to press E and extrude it up just a little bit. And we're going to use that as a guideline to sort of create a railing around the whole top of the boat. But we'll get to that in a minute. Now, something I want to do before we continue is separate the floor from the boat to make them two separate objects, and that'll come in useful for when we add the material to the boat. So to do that, I'll go into top view, I'll press tab to go into edit mode, and I'll select these bottom faces. Now to get them to be a separate object from the rest of the boat, I'll press P, and this menu comes up that says separate by, and we'll click selection. So now if you press T or tab to go back into object mode, you can see the floor and the boat are now two separate objects. We want to do the same thing for this board at the front of the boat. So I'll go into front view mode, press tab, Z for transparency, and I'll create a box cut around these faces. Make sure you select everything that's this front board right here, and we'll press P for selection. So now if you were to drag this out, you see it's a separate object from the boat. I'll undo that. So what you should have now are this board, the boat, and the floor. And a little tip in Blender, if you don't want to see something while you're modeling on maybe a different part of your scene, you can press H to hide it. And if you come up here to your scene layers, you can see that object and the eyeball is gone. So to unhide it, click on the eye, hide it. Pretty simple. Now I do want to enclose this face right here that has a gap in it. So to do that, I'll press tab for edit mode, go into vertices selection mode, and just select all these vertices right here and press F, and that fills in the gap nicely. Now what we want to do is add that railing that I talked about. So I'll press tab for edit mode, and I want to select this top layer of vertices. An easy way to do that is to just press Option and then right click. If you're on a PC, it's going to be Alt. I'm on a Mac, so it's Option right click or Alt right click, and that selects just the top ring. This is a useful thing. You can do it for any loop cut. Just press Option or Alt right click and it selects the whole ring. It's a very useful feature in Blender. So I'm going to press 1 for front view. And what I want to do is I want to just duplicate this top layer of vertices. So to do that, I'll press Shift D and then I'll click. And that's making sure they don't go anywhere. Now before I do anything else, I want these top vertices to be a separate object from our boat, just like we separated the floor. So to do that, we'll just press P and separate by selection. Now if we press Tab, we can sort of click that top layer, and you can see just barely that they are two separate objects. To show this further, we'll press Tab to go into edit mode and A to select all, and we'll just extrude up just a little bit. We want to bring back that board that I hid, so I'll unhide it here. And we'll just drag this up using the blue arrow so that it's in line with the front of our boat here, this board we've made. I think that's pretty good. So that's going to become our railing around our boat. Now what we want to do, obviously our boat is looking very jagged and sharp, so we want to add some smoothness to it. Before we do that, I want to change one thing. That's the back of this boat. I want it to sort of bend out a little bit. I won't do that. Never mind, forget that. So an easy way to add smoothness is to select the boat, and we'll press 1 to go into front view, tab for edit mode, and we want to add creases all around our boat so that when we add the subdivision surface, it knows not to smooth out the parts that are supposed to be flat. So to do that, we'll press Z for transparency mode, press B to box, and we'll select all this bottom ring right here. And now to create a crease, we'll press Shift E and then drag it out till it's a nice pink line. And we'll just do the same for all the way around. Shift E, drag it out. For the back, Shift E, and the front. So now that we've added creases to everything all the way around, we can go ahead and go over to the modifiers panel, add a modifier, and we want to add a subdivision surface. Now once we do that, we can increase the views to 3 and the render to 3. Now we want to give our boat a little bit of thickness. So we'll add a modifier and add solidify. And we want it to be approximately 2 inches thick. And if you get any sort of weird distortion when you do this step, it's because you need to apply the scale of your object. So to do that, press Ctrl A and hit scale. That might change it a little bit. So I think 2 inches is a little too thick, so I'll go 1.5. That's pretty good. We'll leave it at that for now. Now we still have some weird shading going on here. And it gets even weirder if we press smooth. So to fix that, we'll add another modifier and we'll go edge split. And that'll smooth out all those weird shadings. You can see we get some nice smooth surface right here to work with for our boat. Now we want to obviously apply all of those same things to this top railing. So let's just repeat the steps we did. We'll press tab for edit mode, Z for transparency. We'll just create creases along all these top parts. An easy way to select vertices other than B to box is using C. Oh. can just sort of paint. If you accidentally select a vertice, just hit the middle mouse wheel and that'll deselect it. We'll press Shift D and drag that out. Same thing with all of these underneath. Okay. Now we'll repeat the steps. Press Ctrl A, apply the scale, add a modifier, subdivision surface, go 3 on each, add a modifier solidify. We'll make this, let's go 2 inches on this one. And if you get all this wacky stuff going, it's because the normals need recalculated. So we'll press Tab, A to select all, and come over here to Shading UVs in the tab and hit Recalculate. And that should fix all the normals. Now if we hit Smooth Shading, we can add another modifier and Edge Split. And just like that, there we go. Really starting to take shape now. Now of course, the floor is a separate object, so we also need to repeat the steps here. Press Tab for edit mode. Option right click, Shift, Option right click. Now we don't need these middle lines, so I'll press Shift and right click on these so that we have just this outer layer of edges. I'll press Shift E and drag it out, create a crease, add a modifier, and subdivision surface. Because we're not going to make it solid, we don't need to go any further. That's good right there. So there we go. We've modeled our rowboat and it's looking pretty good. Next step is to add in the little things for the oars to rest in. So to do that, it's very simple. We'll just press 1 for front view. We'll kind of click where we want them to be. We'll press Shift A and add in a torus. And we want to rotate this by 90 degrees, so we'll press R, X, 90, and then hit enter. We'll press Tab for edit mode, Z for transparency, A to deselect, and then B to box just this bottom part, and we'll drag it down, and then press X and delete those faces. So now we have sort of a little hook here that we can press S to scale down. We can sort of move it. I'll go to top view by pressing 7. Can move it wherever we think it would be good to have. There's a spot for the oars to rest in. I think that's pretty good right there. I'm only going to create one for now, because when we get into the materials, I'll apply the material to that one and then just duplicate it for the other side. Now we also want to model the oars. So to do that, I'll go into top view, put my cursor right by where the oars are going to be put. We'll press Shift A, add in a cube, and it's enormous, so we'll scale it way down. Scale it down even further. That looks good. We'll press Tab for edit mode. Again, Z for transparency, B to box, and we'll drag those vertices out. This is all sort of dependent on how big you want your oar to be. I'm going to leave it about right there. It's a little too wide. I'm going to scale it down. Kind of fit it back in there. That's pretty good. So now we'll select this front face, press 1 for front view, or I'm sorry, 7, we'll go to top view. We'll extrude just this face out. We'll press S and then X to scale it out along the X-axis. And we'll drag that out a little bit. And then E for extrude again. And then we'll just click E for extrude, and then S and X to kind of scale it back in along the X-axis. If you want kind of the front to be a little bit bigger, you can select all of this and sort of scale that up a little. Now obviously it's way too flat and jagged, and it might need to be a little bit longer. We'll select this end face and drag it out. Press 7 for top view. And now we'll add a modifier to it. We'll add a bevel. And if it doesn't do much, it's because, again, we need to apply the scale. So to do that, we'll go Control A and hit scale. And we'll increase the segments to about 5. And that should be good. I'm going to hide the ore for now. Also hide this along with it. And now we're going to get into the materials of our boat. So all the textures that we're going to be using for this tutorial are from cgtextures.com, and I have the links to those textures in the description of this video below. And you want to make sure that you download the tiled version of each texture, at least the 2 for the boat. There's only 2 we're using to texture our boat. Another thing you want to do is download a program called Crazy Bump, and again I'll put the link to this program in the description, but otherwise it's just crazybump.com, I believe. And this is a great program for creating different maps that Blender can use for proper texturing. For a Mac it's still in beta, so if you're on a PC it's probably going to look a little bit different. And I'll just kind of give you a brief overview of how it works. Just going to open the photo that you've downloaded from cgtextures.com, just one at a time. And what we're going to be able to do is going to automatically generate different normal maps. Okay, so first it displays, it has you select a shape. Doesn't really matter which one you select because you can adjust them. Right off the bat we see this purple looking thing. That's called a normal map, if you didn't know that. And this can be used inside of Blender to create a bump map, which is essentially kind of fake bumps and ridges on your texture that make it look realistic. So it's very useful. We also have a displacement map. This is used for the displacement modifier inside of Blender. We're not actually going to be using this on our rowboat today. You're welcome to download it and try it out, or try it out with something else. The 2 we're going to be focused on are the specularity and the normals. The specularity map basically tells Blender how much glossiness, or the proper amount of glossiness to be added. So, if you have it really intense, these parts of your texture are going to have a lot of light reflecting off of them. It's very useful. If you don't understand what any of that means, I'll explain it when we get inside of Blender. For now, just go ahead and save specularity and the normals file. I've already saved them because I've recorded this tutorial before, so I'm not going to save them again. But just save them wherever you have your image textures saved, and then I'll show you how it works inside of Blender. Now that we have our textures downloaded from cgtextures.com, let's get into the materials. So let's delete the default lamp, and to add a little more lighting, we'll add in a sun. I'll press 1 for front view, kind of drag it up and over, R to rotate, and R to rotate again. The nice thing about the sun is it just shoots light in whatever direction you're pointing it, so you really don't have to be that specific with it. We'll change the strength of the sun to 4. And now we'll be able to see more of what we're doing when we get into the materials. So, with the materials, we're going to be doing some, I guess you could say, advanced things, such as like the node editor and UV unwrapping. But I'm going to talk through it, and you'll find it's really not as scary or as complicated as it seems. So we'll get right into it. I'll right click to select our boat, and over here in the materials panel, this little circle, materials, we'll click on new, and we'll name it boat. Now to the right of the color, we'll click this little circle and add image texture. And what that did was telling Blender the color of our object is going to be an image. Rocket science. So click on open and find the texture that you've downloaded from cgtextures.com. If I can find it. Okay, it says wood planks painted. Now, in order to get this texture that you see here applied to our boat, we have to UV unwrap our boat. So if we just go to edit mode, select everything, press U and unwrap, tab back into object mode, and then down here in the viewport shading, go to rendered. You can see it looks terrible. And that's because kind of the default UV unwrapping generally doesn't work out so well. So there's a few things we can do to fix that. I'm going to just show you a really easy way to do simple UV unwrapping that works for objects such as our rowboat. This rendered viewport, by the way, it only works if you're in the Cycles render engine. I know I said that at the beginning, but you just want to make sure you're using Cycles. So let's go back to the solid view. And as I said, we're going to do kind of a little trick to UV unwrap our object in a way that we can properly texture our boat. So I've split the windows. I'll show you how we did that. Just drag this top corner over, and I'll change it from the default, which is this cube down here, to the UV image editor. Now if we press tab, we can sort of see where Blender automatically did the UV unwrapping. And we can see this more if we, down here in the bottom, load in the wood planks painted texture. And it kind of shows you where it did that awful swirly wrapping thing. You can sort of see why it did that. So we're going to fix that. We'll go to solid view. And in edit mode, we want to select just these faces. And it's important for this that you make sure you're in orthographic mode, which is sort of the flat, I think of it as kind of the 2D version of the Blender viewport. So if I just press 5, you can see its proportions look a little off. Press 1 for front view, and then 5, you can see it just flattens it out. And that's important for getting an accurate projection. Because what we're going to do, we're going to select these faces. I'm holding down shift and just right clicking. We're going to hit U, but instead of unwrap, this time we're going to do project from view. And there you can see it just projected UV map of just this side of the boat onto our image. So now if we go to the rendered view, we can see, ta-da, it's lined up perfectly. The scaling is far too big, but it is how we want it. But if we go to the other side, it's still a mess. So we want to do the exact same thing to the other side. So go to the other side of the boat, shift and right click these faces, press U, and project from view. Now if we go rendered, nice, looking good. We want to do the same for the back. So I'll go to the back, select this back face, U, project from view. and there we go. And as I said, we'll adjust the scale and add more detail to our texture in a little bit, but for now, that looks nice. And I want to move on to this railing here. So I'll go to solid mode, select our rail, and we're just going to repeat all the same steps. Click new, to the right of the color, this circle, image texture. And this time you want to open the other texture, if I can find it. And it's the plywood painted. And in the UV image editor down here, you want to change that to plywood painted. We'll double click this material and name it rail. So now we want to UV unwrap our railing. So to do that, I'll go to top view, and I'm going to press A to select everything, U, and this time we're going to just do Smart UV Project. And Blender will just kind of calculate where it thinks the unwrapping and all the cuts need to be. And normally I wouldn't recommend doing this, but for something as small as this, like this little railing that you won't be able to see very much in the final render, I think it's okay to do. I do want to adjust this back part of the rail so that it looks like a separate board. So to do that, I'll go to top view, select these faces right here, and do just like we did for the boat, press U and project from view. And now since I wanted to kind of be going in the direction of this wood grain, I'll rotate it by 90 degrees. And you can see it's created, it kind of looks like its own board there. And we can move this around. You say, hey, I want those knots to be in the back. It's up to you. That looks pretty good right there. So, not bad. Now, again, we'll adjust the scaling and we'll add more detail later. I'm just trying to get the basic textures down first before we go in later and add detail. Just like an artist, doing the big strokes first. Okay, so now for the floor of this boat, we just want to add the same plywood material. So I'll press tab, I'll go to top view, press U and project from view. Now if we go rendered, oh, we see nothing because over here in the materials it's not added. So we can just fix that by clicking on the drop down menu and loading in the rail material that we created for the rail. And there it goes. It finds it and we can click assign. Now I want again the wood grain to be going a different direction. So I'll press in the UV image editor over here, I'll press R, then 90, and that rotates that by 90 degrees. So there you can see got the wood grain going direction I want it, and it is looking good. Now next part is this front board here. So I'll go to the side view, which is the front of the boat. And same thing, with this selected, we'll just go to the drop down menu and click on rail. I'll drag this over so you can see better what I'm doing. I'll go to this side, select these faces, go U, project from view. We want to do that to all sides of this. U, project from view. U, project from view. And now if we go rendered, you can see it's applied the wood material texture to all sides of this. Again, I want the wood grain to be going a different direction on this front part. So I'll split our window again. Go back to the UV image editor. Load in the plywood painted texture. And I'll rotate our UV map. We need to make sure we have the front part selected.
this part right here, rotate it by 90 degrees, and there we go. You can see now it looks like the front of maybe a 2x4 or something, holding everything in place there. And that is looking just fine and dandy. So now we want to do these little hooks right here, as well as our oars. So I'll go solid mode. I'll just select these, press tab, and we'll just do smart UV project since it's sort of a small object. And again, in the materials, select rail and assign. And if we go to rendered, we can see just kind of calculated where it thinks that wood should go. And it's not perfect, you know, there's flaws in it, but it's such a small part of the boat, so we can live with that. Not bad. Did we make these? Okay, this is my second time recording this tutorial, so I'm gonna go ahead and delete this side, and I'll just duplicate this little what do you call it, this little hook, and drag it over. That way it shares the same material. And I'll join them together so that you don't have to keep clicking both of them. So to do that, select one, press shift, select the other, and press Control and J. And now they're one object. Perfect. Okay, so now for the oars. Let's delete this oar. I'll go 7 for top view, and we'll again do the rail texture. We'll select the whole thing by pressing A, and we'll press U and do Smart UV Project. Click OK, and we'll see how that did. Now I want this long part to be going a different direction from the paddle. So we'll select all of these faces. Hope I'm not losing you. There was an easier way to do that. You can go transparency and just beta box those. Anyway, these are over here in the UV image editor. You can see these are all the faces that are going long ways. So if we just go back to rendered view, I can show you what I'm doing. We just press R and 90. There we go, we see the wood grains now going long ways like that until you get to this end part, and it's going a different direction. That looks pretty good. Not bad. So we'll hit assign again for good measure. Go back to solid mode, and now look at that. Let's delete that. I'll duplicate this, rotate it by 180 degrees. And slide it right over. There we go. Not bad. So now, if you were able to follow all of that, and I hope you were, you're well on your way. The hard part is really over. We're just going to be doing some tweaking, a few little tricks, show you how to get some realistic materials going, and we're going to be using the node editor. So for the node editor, we'll change the UV image editor down here to the node editor. And if you've never used nodes before, don't be scared by the intimidating appearance I guess they have. All it really is, if we select just our boat material, you see we have our image texture, which is plugged into diffuse, which is essentially the color, and that's plugged into our material output, which is what enables Blender to be able to view it. And that's the same thing for the rail texture, image texture, diffuse, material output. anything you do, any nodes you connect together and mix them together affects the material output. And that's what enables us to create realistic textures and very cool looking things. So the first thing we want to do with our rail texture selected, I'll just press G to grab, move these over. We want to add a little bit of glossiness because no material in real life is 100% glossy. So to do that, we'll press Shift A. All of the controls in the node editor, by the way, are just the same in Blender. So Shift A to add something, and we'll add a mix shader. And we'll just drop that in right in between the diffuse and the material output. Next we'll add Shift A, we'll add a glossy shader because we said we want to make this glossy. Now if we connect the output of the glossy BSDF into the bottom part of the mix shader, then what happens? We get glossiness. And if we turn it all the way up, it's 100% glossy. As you can see, nice and shiny. Metal boat. We turn all the way down, no glossy. Again, rocket science. So, wood has a little bit of glossiness. It's not that glossy, but we'll go 0.1, at least for now. And we can turn the roughness up, maybe to 0.3. You can also type, because Blender is really cool like that. So there we go, we've added some glossiness, mix shader, our diffuse input, our glossy input, and our image texture. Now what we want to do, we want to add a little bit of bump mapping. So to do that, we'll duplicate our image texture, which if you remember is just with the image texture selected, we just press Shift D to duplicate it. That's how I did that. And I'll move this over by pressing G. And we want to change this image texture to non-color data right here. Now we'll press Shift A and we want to add in a bump node. And I'm really bad at remembering where nodes are, so my bad habit is to just search for them because it saves me a ton of time of feeling stupid. So now we'll connect the color output into the height of the bump node. And we'll connect the normal output into the normal input on the diffuse node and also the glossy node. So hope you're able to follow that. Image texture changed to non-color data, into a bump node, into the height of a bump node, and we split that output between the diffuse and the glossy. Okay, now you can see there's far too much bump mapping going on, so we want to change that. But before we do, I promised we would change the scaling of our wood grain, and I want to show you how we're going to do that. So I'll just drag our image texture over a little bit to give us some more room. Press middle mouse and Shift to pan. I'm going to press Shift A, and again I'm just going to search for a node. I'm going to search for texture coordinate. Comes up. I'm just going to place that. Now I'm going to Shift A again and search for mapping node. And we're going to connect, before you get too scared at these two nodes, let me explain what it does. This one is telling Blender, okay, we want to use our UV unwrapping that we did for our texture. We want to use that in order to affect the scale. So we're going to connect the UV input into the vector of this mapping node. We'll connect the vector output into the vector input on our image texture node. And that's really all there is to it. So texture coordinate, mapping node, image texture. That's plugged into our diffused, split into our mix shader, that goes to our material output. On the other side of the mix shader, we have our glossy, our bump map, and our other image texture that is using the non-color version of the texture to create our bump map. And that's it. That's all the node setup we're going to be doing for this. But it looks terrible at the moment. So right here, if you will notice, we have scale. And I think if you're on a PC, I think this does look a little bit different, but somewhere you will have a scale option. So if we just change all of these to maybe 1.5, 1.5, 1.5, you can see the texture got a little bit smaller. We made it, let me just show you, we'll go crazy, like 5 on all of it. And then our bump mapping is crazy, so we'll connect the vector output, also plug it into the image texture that's using the bump map. And now you can see our texture is really small and jagged lines. Let me disconnect the bump map so you can see that better. You guys see how it got real small, real fine? It's too small, so we want to change it back to 1.5. And that's pretty good. So now let's plug our bump map back into the diffuse, back into the glossy. And you can see the strength of it is way too high, so we'll decrease that. Something that looks a little bit realistic. Let's go 0.3. That's pretty good, at least for now. Yay, good. And that's it for the rail. That's all we're gonna do for the railing. So hopefully that's not too scary. Texture coordinate, UV into the mapping node. The vector output split between the image texture non-color and the normal image texture. The non-color is plugged into a bump map, which is split between the diffuse and the glossy, into a mix shader, into material output. Sorry if maybe 10 minutes ago you saw exactly where I was going. You did all this out perfectly. For those who didn't and need the review, that's why I say things twice. Sometimes. Okay, so now we're going to do the exact same thing for the boat, but we're going to do a little bit more complicated version of it. This is really the simplified, dumbed down version of how you would create a kind of a normal texture, I would say. But we want to add a little more detail to the boat version of this because, well, it's what you see more. And I'll explain how we're doing that and how we're going to use those textures that we created using Crazy Bump, which hopefully you've had a chance to download and create those textures because we're going to be using them. So we'll do the same thing. We'll add in a mix shader and a glossy shader. Again, I'm just searching because I'm lazy. Now, instead of just saying, yeah, glossy, that's great, we're going to use the specularity map to tell Blender exactly where we want the glossiness to be. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and add in our texture coordinate and our mapping node that we did for the rail texture. It's these two right here. So I'll press Shift A, search for texture coordinate, Shift A, and mapping. UV output into the vector input, vector output into the image texture input. And now we want to change the scale of this wood texture to be a little bit smaller. So to do that, we'll go to 2 on all 3 of these, the X, the Y, and the Z. So now you can see we got smaller wood. And that works because we downloaded the tileable texture from cgtextures.com. So now we got the scale we want. Now let's get back to the glossy material. Like I said, we want the specularity, or the glossiness, to be specific to our wood material. So to do that, we can just press Shift A and add in an image texture. And now we'll click on Open. And we want to find the specularity texture that we saved from Crazy Bump. And it's this real dark black and white one. So we'll load that in. And waiting for, okay, there we go. So now with that loaded in, we can just drag, well, we want to change this to non-color data again. Really whenever you're doing a texture, you only want the image texture that the color that you actually want to come through, you only want that one set to color. Everything else can be non-color data. So if we just take the color output and plug it into the factor of our mix shader, you can see we have way more realistic glossiness going on. You can see it over here in the preview. The light is catching where sort of the ridges of the boat are. So I'll unplug that. So now we just have general glossiness. Plug it in. We have way more realistic looking glossiness and shine. So that works because essentially we're mixing, using this mix shader, we're mixing the image texture with a glossy shader, but the factor of the glossiness is being affected by the specularity texture. Hope I didn't lose you there. Now another thing we need to do is this needs to share the same scale as our image texture. So just connect the output of our mapping node into the vector input. And there you can see it locks on even more to the proper scaling. Really affected over here. You can see where the light is sort of getting in the proper cracks of our image texture, of our wood grain, and it's looking way better already. Now, like I said, this is a little bit more complicated version of the railing. So of the railing, we just had a glossy node. This one we have a glossy node and a specularity map showing which parts of the image texture to be glossy. Now we're going to do the same thing with the bump map. We'll press Shift A, add in an image texture, and we'll click Open. And this time we're going to use, oh, that's the wrong one. We're going to use the normal map that we created in Crazy Bump. It's the purple looking one. So we'll open that. And just like we used a bump map before, we won't use a bump map for this, but we'll use a normal map, which is similar to a bump map. And we'll connect the color output into the color input. Make sure to change this to non-color data again. And I'll take the output and plug it into the diffuse normal and also the glossy normal. And now you can see our boat's really starting to pop. But we have too much bump mapping going on, and this normal map needs to again share the same scale. So we'll connect that output from our mapping. There we go. You can see it's really starting to apply those bumps in the right areas. But it's far too much. So we can just adjust the strength. Maybe 0.4. Yeah, 0.4 is good. Let's go 0.5. I like 0.4. There you can see it actually looks like boards now. There's some light catching the cracks, our glossiness, and we have some bumps sticking out because of our normal map. One thing you will notice, there's probably too much glossiness. It almost looks a little metallic. So to adjust that, let's go where we have our specularity map, which is this one right here. If I drag it out, you can read it, SP. And this node is connected into the mix shader again. To adjust how much glossiness we have, we can add in a color ramp. So it's in converter, color ramp, and just drop that in between the specularity map and the mix shader. And now these colors right here will be used to adjust the amount of specularity. So if we click on the white and just bring it down, you can see that brings down the glossiness of our specularity. So all the way up, all the way glossy, all the way down, no glossiness. So I find maybe right in there. We want there to be some shine, not too much. That looks pretty good. Pretty happy with that. And really, that's it. That's the boat. So I'll review this node setup again. Again, that's it. If you were able to follow along, you just created a pretty basic node setup for how you would do kind of a lot of materials. And if this made sense to you, and you are well on your way to understanding the more complicated side of Blender. So I'll just review again. We have our texture coordinate, the UV output plugged into a mapping node. We set the scale to 2. And then we split the vector output into 3 different image textures. The middle one was our color one. That was plugged into a diffuse, into a mix shader, into a material output. The diffuse was mixed with a glossy node. The glossy node has a factor value, or the factor of the glossy node was affected by the specularity map plugged into the color ramp to adjust how much specularity we have. And down here we have our normal map, which was plugged into a normal map node, and that was divided between our diffuse and our glossy node. So there you go. That's it. Pretty basic, and our boat is looking pretty good. I'm very happy with that. So if you've gotten this far, pat yourself on the back. You're doing a great job. And now I'm sure if you've gotten this far, you want to know how to create the rest of the scene that you see in the image that I showed at the beginning. First of all, we'll go to the side view mode so we can see our boat from front on. And we want to rotate our oars so that they're actually sort of in the water. I'm just pressing R to rotate. I'll also press R twice to have it rotate in the other direction so that it's sort of up on end like that. Now when you do this, it's important that you make sure the oar is inside the little holder there. Now I want it to be a little bit steeper than that. So that should be good. Now we'll just do the same thing to this other one. And it's a little bit tedious, but that's pretty good. Now we want to select our entire boat. So I'll just press Z for transparency mode, press B to box, and just grab all of these. I'll hold down Shift and right click our lamps so we can deselect that. And now I just want to rotate it a little this direction. I'll go to the side view and rotate it up. That way it'll sort of look like when we add in the sand and the water, it'll sort of look like the boat sort of slid up on the edge of the water, or the edge of the sand. So that's pretty good. So now let's get into the rest of our scene. So I'll go to top view. And we want to import our background image. So to do that, I'll press Shift A, and I want to import that image that we downloaded from cgtextures.com. I'm going to go ahead and import it as a plane. Now if you don't have this option here, you just need to go to your user preferences, search the add-ons. You can just search for planes. And right here you see import export images as planes. Make sure that's checked and then save your settings. So now if you press Shift A and go into Mesh, you should see that option right there. So I'm just going to find this aerial shot of clouds, rotate it by 90 degrees, along the x-axis by 90 degrees. Oh, what happened here? There we go. Now we're just going to scale it up. Now we also want to position it sort of halfway down, because if we go to rendered view, you can see since we were able to import this image as a plane, we have the image already all set on this plane. We don't have to do any UV unwrapping. So that's why that add-on is very useful. Now I want to look at our scene through the camera viewport. So I'll press 0. And I want to sort of position my camera so that the boat is a little bit to the left. About like that. We'll adjust it later when we have the rest of our scene put together. I can pull back by pressing G and scale, S. That's about the general idea of where I want my camera. So I want this background image to fill up our camera, obviously. So I'll just press S to scale up, and then remember to sort of drag it down. Now I'll press 7 for top view and drag this image back, because we'll have a lot of water in here. We want these clouds to be in the pretty distant background. Now this means we have to sort of scale our image up and move it around, but that's okay. So now if we check in the rendered view, we can see we have some nice clouds coming in. I might scale it up more, move it down. Again, we'll adjust all of this later when we actually have our water and our sand in our scene. But for now, that's something pretty good to work with. So now I'll go back to solid mode. I'm going to adjust my sun a little bit so that it's rotated a little bit more toward our boat. Maybe so it's not so high either. That's pretty good. I'm just pressing R to rotate it around. Okay, so now we want to get into the fun part, which is the water. And to do the water, we're going to be using the ocean modifier inside of Blender, which is a lot of fun. If you didn't know Blender had an ocean modifier, I'll just show you how it works, and it's really fun. So to do that, we'll just press Shift A and add in a plane. Move this plane over. Actually, we can leave it there. Then we'll go over here to the modifiers panel, which is this wrench. And we'll click Add Modifier and select Ocean. Okay, now you can see it added this massive body of water, and it's up too high, so we'll bring it down along the z-axis. We want to change the scale to 0.1 and the choppiness to 0.1, because I'm not really going for an ocean as much as just sort of a clear lake with kind of a sandy beach. If you want yours to be really choppy, you can adjust that how you like it. Now I'm going to kind of scale it down so that Blender doesn't have as much geometry to work with. And we'll move it back to about right there. And that's pretty good. So now if we look through our camera, we see our water, and we want to move this image back so that you can't see a distinct line where our ocean stops. Maybe we'll scale it up a little bit. It's good to have it really big because you want sort of that background, that water to go into the distant background. I'll scale this up a little. Pull our background image down. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now I'm going to select our ocean again. And if I change this resolution, this is the big thing we're going to be working with here. If I change it to say 15, you can see we've added more detail. Now the higher you go with this number, the higher the detail in our water. But unfortunately, obviously, the higher or the slower the render time in Blender is. So while we're just sort of working with the materials, we're going to leave it at 15 for now. So now if I go to render, you can see, our rowboat is stranded on a horrible looking plain of hard snow or something. So we obviously need to add in our material to this. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and go over to the materials panel, click on new, and I'm going to split this window, just like we've been doing with the materials for the boat. And I'm going to change it from the default to the node editor. And we're going to delete this diffuse because we're not going to be using that. And I'm going to mix two textures together. So I'm going to add in a mix shader, a transparent shader, and a glass shader. So now we have glass mixed with transparency, and we don't want the transparency to be exactly equal with the glass, so we'll just take this to a 0.4. We also want to adjust the factor of the transparency. Right now, if we were to render it, we would get some very noisy light trying to pass through the glass, like you can see here. So we want to fix that. So to do that, we're going to add in a light path node. And I'm just searching for these nodes because I'm lazy. And now we're going to add in two math nodes. So I'll just add in a math node and duplicate that. Make sure they're both set to add, which is their default. And now I'll plug in the shadow ray and the diffuse ray to the first add node. I'll plug the output of that one into the second add node, and then the glossy ray into the other input on the second add node. So I know that's probably confusing, I went sort of fast, but it's basically we just need a way to add these three together. So we're using two math nodes to do that. And now I'm going to take this output and plug it into the factor of our mix shader. And now if you look over here at the preview, you can see all of that noise went away. Because basically it was a way for Blender to get around the things that would hit this glass material and cause some noise. So that's very useful. So now the last thing we want to do with our water material is adjust the color. So to do that, what I find works pretty well is to just create a color ramp node. And this is a very good node in Blender. It's very useful for a lot of things. I'm just going to click plus, and now we have essentially three colors to blend together. So if we just click each of these marks, it's a different color. So I'm going to adjust this black to just a pure white. This middle one I'm going to adjust to a very faint blue color. And this last one I want to be kind of a turquoisey, whitish color. Now we're going to connect the color output into the color input on the glass node. And this blue might be a little too dark, so we'll bring that back some. Okay, so that's it. That's sort of my makeshift water material. You can also give the transparency a color, and that'll adjust sort of the light passing through it, what kind of color it is. There's plenty of tutorials online on how to create a water material. This is sort of one I've come up with myself, and it works pretty well. So if we just give that a render, you can see we start to have something that's looking a little bit like water. So that's very exciting. if I just drag this over, currently you see only one of our oars is in the water. The boat's not really in the water. So maybe that's due to the fact that we've rotated our boat a little too much. So instead of moving the boat down, I'm just going to move the water up. Because I want at least this oar to be completely submerged. I want this one to sort of be dipping in the water a little bit. I want to make sure it stays in that holder, which can be tricky. I'm getting lost here. I don't know what I'm doing. That'll be good from that angle. So now if we give it a render, or at least change it to render mode. There we go. We can see the back part of our boat is in some water. This paddle's completely submerged. And what's left now, obviously add some detail to our water and then add in the bank, or kind of the sandy shoreline, for this boat to look like it's sort of lodged onto. So to do that, I'll go back to solid mode. I'm going to raise the water just a tad. About right there, that's pretty good. And now in the modifiers, I'm going to change the resolution to 25. And I'll go ahead and save it in case Blender crashes. The ocean modifier isn't exactly the most reliable. And if we render that, you can see there's already some detail added with the ripples and stuff like that. So that's pretty exciting. So I'll go back to solid mode. And maybe we pulled this up too much. I don't know. So now what I want to do, I want to go to top view. And while we're working with our sand, I'm just going to hide our ocean. So I can either press H to hide that, or over here just click this eyeball. And I'll press Shift A and add in a plane. And now I'm going to scale this plane up and move it over to about right there. I'll scale it up even more. That's pretty good. So if we look at it from our camera view, basically we don't want corners shown. That's good. Alright, so now what I want to do, I want to press tab for edit mode, and we're going to subdivide this. So I'll press W and click subdivide. Now in the bottom left corner we have a subdivide menu that popped up. And we can adjust the number of cuts to say 35. Now if we press tab for object mode, we're going to add in a subdivision surface modifier. Increase that to 3. And now I'm going to press tab back for edit mode. And what we want to do with this is sort of create, if you can kind of picture a, what's it called, a bank or a shoreline, just kind of plummeting into the deep abyss. So we're going to select 3 points along the edge of this here. Doesn't really matter where. And down here we're going to enable proportional editing. Make sure it's set to smooth. And we're just going to press G to grab. So now you can see it's creating sort of a plummeting plane going into the water. So once we've done that, you can see now we have a nice, if we go to camera view, sort of plummets off into the distance. Maybe a little less. Drag this up so you can kind of see. That's pretty good. Okay, so now we have our basic shoreline of our land. And what I want to do,
is sort of build up a little mound here in the front. So I'll go back to edit mode, and we'll go ahead and apply the subdivision surface modifier. You have to be in object mode to do that. So go ahead and apply that. We also want to apply the scale of our object. So to do that, we'll press Ctrl A and scale. Now we'll press Tab for edit mode, and you can see we have way more vertices now that we've applied the subdivision surface. So if we just select one of these that's sort of close to where the front of our boat is, and with proportional editing still enabled, I'm going to scroll this circle way down, and it's hard to see what I'm doing. I'm going to go to the camera view, so you select that, scroll this down, and sort of just create a little mound right here. We'll do that around the parts of the boat we want to look like are stuck in sand. And we also want, sort of on the left part of our shot, we want this to all be a beachy area. So we'll just pull this up. I'm just clicking and dragging up, adjusting the size with the middle mouse wheel. Okay, now we can kind of see which parts of the beach are going to be sticking out of water if we bring back our ocean, or our water. It's the ocean modifier. So I'll just bring that back. And that's looking pretty good so far. I think I want a little bit more sand in here. So I'll just select some of these vertices underneath the water and pull it up. And right here I want there to be kind of a ledge, as if the boat sort of scooted the dirt around. And I mean, really, this is all up to you, how much you want to do with it. I think that looks pretty good for now. Also, we're going to add some sculpting, but before we do that, we want to apply a material to it. Now, generally, this is not how you should texture your objects. You should always do the material probably beforehand. In this case, we're going to, after we've already done all this manipulation of it, we're going to add a material. And we can get away with it because it's just a sand image that we're going to scale way up, so you won't really be able to see the detail in it. So with our plane selected, let's go over to the materials, click on new, and the circle to the right, and open the soil sand image. Now if I press Tab and A to select all, we're just going to press U and then project from view. And we'll go ahead and hit assign. So now if we go to rendered, you can see it's applied this soily sand texture, and it looks terrible because it's enormous. So we want to adjust that. But also what I'm noticing right off the bat is these oars currently are stuck in the sand. So we want to fix that before we go any further. So I'll just go back to edit mode, select a random vertice, and I still have proportional editing enabled. So I just want to drag this way down. And this is, remember, this is all going to have water over it. So the little holes you make all really just kind of add detail. It doesn't have to be perfect by any means. So I want to do the same for this side. And that's pretty good. So now these will actually be submerged in water and not in sand. Okay, good. So now we want to add detail to our sand texture. So we'll split this window, and I'll go to the node editor. Press N to get rid of that sidebar. And now if you remember what we did for the boat material, we added in a texture coordinate node. I'm just going to search for it because I'm a little bit lazy. And we added in a mapping node. And this was to adjust the scale of our image texture. So let's connect the UV to the vector and the vector output and to the vector input on the image texture. So now we'll just go a scale. I'm going to do a scale of 12. And there you can see it's looking a lot better. And now we just want to add in some very basic bump mapping, nothing fancy. We're just going to use the same image texture, press Shift D to duplicate it, change it to non-color data. I'll move these two over. And now I'm going to add in a normal map. And drop this in, connect the color output into the color input, the normal output into the normal input on the diffuse, and we get some really wacky bump mapping. So we need to take the scale vector into the image texture of the normal. You can see that makes it look a lot better, but the strength is far too high. So we'll change it to 0.5. And now we just have some subtle bumps and grooves in the sand. It's nothing fancy, but it adds a little bit, and we can get away with sort of the sloppy UV unwrapping job that we did. Now one last thing, I'm going to press Shift A and add in a mix shader. And then a glossy node. That's because sand has a little bit of glossiness. So I'll just go 0.1 for the factor value, and I think that should be pretty good. So now if we go to solid mode, go ahead and save this. I'll drag this over. One final thing we want to do is add a little bit of detail to this sand, and we'll do that with sculpting. So if we go to sculpt mode and just go to the clay brush, put the strength all the way up, you can just sort of paint around, and this adds some just sort of bumps and ridges. Just adding a little bit of detail. I find it's really nice to do. You can go however much overboard you want with it. It really doesn't matter. It's just some basic sculpting. I'm going to click smooth shading to smooth that out. Now I'm going to bring back our water, and before let's see how this looks. We'll go to the rendered view, and it's looking pretty good. It's not bad. You can see where we have our sand, and then it gets deeper and deeper, and then back here it really starts to plummet. That's good. You can definitely see the turquoisey color coming through, which is nice. By the way, if you want the quality of your render to be better, I've put my samples to 500 each in the render setting. You can do less or more depending on how much you want. I did 500 for my final render, and it worked pretty well. So one final thing, with our ocean selected, I'm going to go to the materials again. I'm going to save this in case Blender crashes. I'm going to change the resolution to 35. Again, you can go however high or low you want with it. And I think that looks pretty good. I'll save it one more time, and let's see how this looks. And might take a while. There you go. We have our water. We have a nice beach texture. I might try to bridge this gap a little. It looks a little funny. We'll just adjust, not the ocean, not the water. We'll adjust this sand right here. Bring up this vertice, kind of smooth that out a little. And that's pretty good. One final thing I did for my render, I just selected this front part of the boat and I renamed it Focus. And then if I select my camera and go over to the camera settings, under Focus, under the Depth of Field tab, I just selected the focus, which is this board right here. And then I've changed the aperture to an f-stop and put that at a 3.0. And that gives sort of the background and the foreground, a nice blurry effect as if it were taken with a real camera. It's sort of the very basic, simple depth of field that you can do inside of Blender. So I think that's all I've got to say about this. Thank you for watching. I know this was a long tutorial, but we've covered a lot of things. We've covered how to model a basic rowboat, some water material, some UV unwrapping, how to use the node editor. What else did we talk about? Just a whole bunch of things. So thank you for watching, and I hope you're able to use what you've learned here to go create some awesome artwork, and hope to see you in a future tutorial. Thanks for watching.